What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raffs, of course. We've got Jays we got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
Okay, so I got a question for you.
Okay.
We're not gonna we made an executive decision. We're not gonna go revisit all the stuff we talked about Monday, as Indiana and Kentucky both lost again.
Mm-hmm.
But the more this is happening to Kentucky, and especially after that loss to a South Carolina team that it's not been great, there are so many different levels to this John Calipari conversation, right? Should they fire him? Will they fire him? Will Texas approach him? All these different things. The question I'm most interested in at this moment that I want your perspective on is how much of a factor in all of this is DJ Wagner, right? Because DJ Wagner is not just a guy who committed to Kentucky. DJ Wagner is the full circle completion of John Calipari's one and done philosophy. John Calipari's first one and done recruit was DJ Wagner's dad. So there's a personal relationship there that goes well beyond just, oh, this guy's really good and he decided he's going to go to Kentucky no matter who the coach is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the more this is turning into an absolute disaster for Kentucky, I'm just wondering, because I just don't see any way that anything's going to happen until after DJ Wagner leaves because of how tight he is to Calipari in particular, which is not the case with every recruit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a factor? Are we going to be talking about that as a factor at all at the end of this? Or am I just sort of trying to throw something else into the conversation that doesn't need to be there?
I'm sure it matters. I mean, in the same way that any coach I'm not sure DJ Wagner is that special in that sense, though. Like if he had the top, I mean, he has like 4 of the top 7 recruits. If anybody had 4 of the top 7 recruits, and that's part of what makes it so intriguing, is because Calipari's, I don't know if standard is the right word, because I've talked endlessly on this podcast about how I don't think he really cares about whether or not he wins basketball games or not. So like his standard of winning is just not that high. It's certainly not nearly as high as his standard of recruiting is. So it's such an intriguing situation because, and I don't really know how close he is to getting fired or how close he is to leaving for the Texas job, for instance. But no coach, if he does get fired this year, no coach in the history of ever has gotten fired with 4 of the top 7 recruits coming in the next year. Never. I mean, he and K are like the only coaches ever to have a recruiting class that features 4 of the top 7 recruits coming into his program. So I'm sure for him, I'm just not sure if you ask Kentucky the program, like maybe for Calipari it does, but if you ask Kentucky, we're not going to fire him because we're worried about DJ Wagner specifically not coming to Kentucky? I bet it would be more general than that. That it's just, I mean, if we fire him, we're probably losing at least half of those guys the second he walks out the door. Right? I mean, I would be surprised if all 4 cut. If it's because like Calipari is the guy in the room. It's not like Shire at Duke, where Shire was really the workhorse in the recruiting for several years before, and it was just K kind of the icing on top of the cake to close deals. So I don't know. That's a good question. The other thing I want to bring up is that, like, are we sure that Kentucky is better than South Carolina? This is the tough part about like when we really look, are we positive that they're better than South Carolina? And because this is the tough. I mean, they haven't beaten anybody good. South Carolina hasn't beaten anybody good. It's not like they showed us anything they hadn't showed us over and over and over again already this season.
I need to see more from South Carolina before I entertain that possibility.
And I'm not going to act like I care about what's happened on the floor for South Carolina. I still have. I watched the Kentucky game. I haven't watched a single second of South Carolina. So the point being is that we being college basketball people in general, like South Carolina starts off bad. Okay, South Carolina's just bad. Kentucky, we just kind of re-diagnose over and over again that Kentucky is bad. It's the same thing we did with North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina, it was like 3 games into the season, everybody should have come to the consensus that North Carolina wasn't as good as we thought they were. But for the next 2 weeks, when they kept losing, it was, well, is North Carolina really that good? Is North Carolina really that good? Wow, they lost to Indiana at Assembly Hall. Like, none of these things were really that surprising if you look at what had already happened. So, like, I'm like, is it really annoying for Kentucky fans that they lost to South Carolina? Yeah, and should they have lost at Rupp? No, probably not. And I don't actually think South Carolina is as good as Kentucky. But at the same time, it's also a team who gets smoked by every good team that they play. You know, LSU's 90th at KenPom, and they only beat them by 3 at home. Like, I'm just not sure that I'm all that surprised by the outcome, to be honest with you. But there's such a yeah, it's such an intriguing conversation, like how Calipari, to kind of bring it back to where
Mm-hmm.
to where you had initially, brought it up. It's such an intriguing conversation because everything Calipari does is pretty unprecedented. And when he gets fired or when he leaves, it'll be pretty unprecedented because, like, Kentucky hasn't been great, the last 6 or 7 years, and it seems pretty much since that, Carl Anthony Towns teams, it feels like we're either, they certainly haven't been over exceeding expectations. But whether Kentucky fans are ready to hear it or not, the second he walks out the door, your chances of being a good basketball team go down because whoever comes in isn't going to be the recruiter that Calipari is. The possibilities of the guys you bring in the building every single year, like, that talent level is going to go down. So what does that mean for Calipari? Is Calipari just over it, or because there's another place that he could go with the same kind of resources? Is the AD and the rest of the university just over it at this point? I don't know. They're all very intriguing questions.
Because the final thing, this is ultimately kind of where I got to on this question, is I agree with you that generally speaking, DJ Wagner isn't different than any other top recruit Kentucky gets, and Kentucky gets enough of them that you're not doing anything based off of one guy.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, though, I agree with what you said, this idea of you would be scared to make that decision because of the impact it could have on recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
So then and we don't need to go into a whole thing on this, but then my head goes to, okay, if that's your philosophy and that's your thought process, then Calipari's leaving when Calipari wants to, no matter how bad this gets, because he's going to continue to recruit at a high level.
Sure.
That's kind of where that question came from of, is it, okay, he's got DJ Wagner coming in. DJ Wagner is, this close relationship, this long history, so we're not pulling the trigger now, but if this goes down the drain again next season, it's a different conversation. That's just where I'm curious if that ever changes, because I don't think the recruiting is going to change. So are you just going to keep doing the same thing over and over?
It's a fair question for sure. And I guess my main response would be, if there is a recruit that would get him to think that way, it would be DJ Wagner. And I also think DJ Wagner would follow him wherever he went. And I think the program knows that.
Mm-hmm.
So if they want DJ Wagner to play basketball in Lexington next year, they need him to stick around at least one more year.
Yeah. There's just some interesting X factor elements to this happening with DJ Wagner coming next season.
The last thing I want to say, that apart from, and this is just kind of speaks to the completely unrealistic expectations of Kentucky fans and just the overblown nature of any time Kentucky struggles. Other than the COVID year, when John Calipari's team went 9-16, John Calipari's lost double-digit games in college basketball seasons 1, 2, 3 times at Kentucky. It's never been more than 12. All 3 of those years, he won at least 26 games. Excuse me, at least 21 games. That was all the way back in 2013. And I believe that was the Nerlens Noel hurt year. Maybe not.
I
That might be a little early for that, but I think it might have been. At one point, Nerlens Noel got hurt, and that was like the guy that was the number 1 recruit in the country, and then he got hurt, and Kentucky's season went off the rails after that. My point just being, and within that, he has years of 26-8, 25-6, 30-7, 32-6, 27-9, 38-1, 38-2, and 35-3. The point just being is that it's the what winning and success means to different programs is, fluctuates unbelievably. Right. I mean, we could go look at Northwestern and see how many years Doug Collins has been there and be like, why in the world is Doug Collins still the coach at Northwestern? I like Doug Collins.
Chris? Doug's his dad.
Excuse me. Doug. No, not Doug. Chris. Chris Collins. My bad.
It's one of the Collinses.
But my point being the same is that Chris Collins is still at Northwestern, and his track record at Northwestern suggests that they should have moved on as a Power 5 conference team like before now, and they haven't. So it's just an interesting conversation because like Calipari shouldn't be fired. He shouldn't. I mean, I don't know who needs to hear that.
I agree too.
But in Lexington, it's like, oh my God. And part of it's the expectations because this team was supposed to be really, really good. The National Player of the Year on his way back, yada, yada, yada. But the expectation from Kentucky fans and the, oh my God, the world is crashing down when they're 10-6 is borderline amusing.
And a testament to what Calipari's done.
As much as I hate testifying to what Calipari has done, it is a testament to what Calipari is done. Okay. Good old fashioned. Let's talk about what happened on the floor last night in college basketball podcast. No bells or whistles coming along with this one. No fancy titles or games that we'll be playing. There are 4 basketball games we want to talk about in yet another good night of college basketball. 4 games, 2 in the Big East, 1 in the Big 12, 1 in the SEC. Because I don't know if you knew, Josh, there are a lot of really good teams at the top of the Big East, and they just kind of play what seem to be really important basketball games.
They're just all playing each other over this 2-week stretch. It's incredible.
Yeah. And, that's tough when, 2 of the 4 teams that we're talking about here, maybe not 2 of the 4, 2 of the 5 being, Marquette and Providence being way better and way more important on the national stage than they were ever supposed to be. Then you kind of end up with this, they're all bunched together when it's just supposed to be like a solid portion of the schedule. And now you've got, who do we talk about on the last pod? Like somebody is playing Providence, UConn, and Creighton in the next 3 games. Maybe it was Marquette. I'm not sure. But anyways, yes, they're all together. There are a lot of really good games kind of in this 2-week stretch. But last night, number 25, Marquette, 82. Number 6, UConn, 76. Marquette down by 4 at halftime, outscores the Huskies by 10 in the second half, 49-39. 82-76, like I said, the final score. Marquette's guys that have been doing it all year, just kind of doing it again. Tyler Kolek doing his thing, distributing the basketball, and they get enough done at home to come back and beat UConn. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, Marquette just doing what Marquette does offensively. Casual 50% shooting from the field. Just another day at the office. And on the UConn side, I mean, Donovan Clingan was a monster off the bench. If there's one thing this UConn team can hold on to, it's somewhere you get production off that bench. It seems like every game, whether it's Clingan having a really good game or somebody else and Clingan contributing a little bit because he's obviously a factor, even if he's only scoring 8 points as opposed to 20. But this is becoming a thing with these guards. Andre Jackson, Tristan Newton, Jordan Hawkins, 8 of 23 for 24 points. And, it was Sonogo the game before. It was Donovan Clingan in this game. It's not like the interior there was a little bit of a stretch where, we were talking about his teams kind of figured Sonogo out, and he hasn't been quite the same player since they got into conference play, obviously. But then you have Donovan Clingan to go sort of fill that gap in a game like this. And So the interior is not the problem. Adama Sanogo's struggles are not the problem here. The problem is you're just getting no efficiency from that perimeter, and it is simply not good enough to win these games against the other teams in the Big East, especially on the road against a Marquette team that's going to show up and play hard because they're coached by Shaka Smart. And they've figured out how to turn this into an efficient offense and move the ball really well and all that kind of stuff. They're difficult to scheme against. And so now I'm getting a little conflicted about UConn because part of me still believes in them 100%. And part of me is really wondering if they're as good as and we'll get to the other teams in this conversation in the next game, but if they have the ability game after game to keep pace with the best teams in the Big East. I'm not jumping ship quite yet, but this is becoming a major concern that somebody has to produce from the guard position. Because if there's one question about this team I have, it's who's that guy at the end of a game? Are you feeding Sanogo? Right? And you look at the other teams in this conference, they kind of have that more defined. And it's kind of just, point guard by committee, Andre Jackson, Tristan Newton, Jordan Hawkins needs to be able to shoot the ball really well, and sometimes that doesn't happen. There's just a lot of question marks and things that there's a lot that needs to go right to beat UConn, and there's a lot of things UConn needs to go right to beat the best teams in the Big East. That's kind of where I'm at.
It's unacceptable that Adama Sanogo in a big game is 5 of 7 from the field. With all due respect to Donovan Clingan is not better than Adama Sanogo.
No.
Even if he might have arguably been last night. In 19 minutes, he was 10 on 5 of 7 from the field. I don't care how good Donovan Clingan has been. You don't play him over to Adama Sanogo ever. All of the games that UConn has struggled in correlate to how many shots Sanogo has taken. The guards were horrendous against Creighton. Horrendous. Why'd they win the basketball game?
Sanogo was the best player on the floor.
Exactly. They fed him the entire game. And he hit a couple threes, and he was on the end of he was in the right place every single time in that long possession that kind of sealed the game when it was, a minute long possession because they got so many, tip outs and offensive rebounds. I mean, play them both for all I care. Just play them both for 5 minutes. Just see how it goes. If you feel like Clingan's playing that well, but it's irresponsible as a head coach to let the best player in the Big East go 5 of 7 from the field and only play 19 minutes when he only had 1 foul. Since when are we not playing our best player just because somebody off the bench is playing pretty well? That's what happened last night. Donovan Clingan should never play more minutes than Adama Sanogo. Never. Because Adama Sanogo stretches the floor now. Adama Sanogo is shooting 40% from the 3-point line and taking 30 of them. So he's not taking a ton of them, but he's also not taking 7 of them.
And he's certainly more of a threat to stretch the floor than Clingan is, regardless of whether he's hitting him at a high clip or not.
Exactly. And he's doing both of those things. Yeah. Relatively, especially for a guy who took 1 3-pointer in his first 2 years of college. Didn't make 1, took 1 total. And he's added it to his game. So all of the things you just said are true. The guards have to be better. And, I can't, 8 of 23?
Mm-hmm.
My apologies if you gave that stat already. 3 of 12 from the 3-point line. Yeah, I mean, what you said is absolutely true. And that might end up being why UConn doesn't win the basketball game. But, I'm sorry, win the Big East. But, I don't understand. Dan Hurley's a really good basketball coach. And I thought he made a fundamental mistake of not putting his best player on the floor as much as he could. That just fails the out loud test. It just does. And maybe there was something else going on, but I watched back this game because I didn't get to see it live, And before I watched the game, I saw how many minutes Sonogo had played and just assumed he had been in foul trouble, and he hadn't been. And I just don't. I like good for Donovan Clingan. Like it's like it would be even more outrageous if Clingan didn't have 20 and 10 on 8 of 11 shooting. But like, is anybody arguing like that Clingan is actually better than Sonogo? I don't think so. You're weird if you are. I don't know. That's frustrating. Like if I was a UConn fan, that'd be incredibly frustrating to me. Because Clingan just should never, ever, ever play more minutes than Sonogo. I don't care how good he's playing.
And especially in a game where you're trying to stem the tide, which was the entire second half, right?
Right.
Of trying to get back within a couple possessions, trying to not let it get into double digits, trying to put a run together to retake the lead after Marquette had come out. Marquette won that second half. I think you said it was by 10. That was when the game changed. You're trying to do something you're trying to do something different because what was, the attempt that was made was not working. And so it's the whole Dan Hurley personality thing is very interesting to me in the way it goes with this team and the expectations of the way this season started. We don't need to get into that now, but yeah, they're probably going to roll off, 5, 6, 7 straight wins at some point here because they're going to stop playing all the best teams in the conference. But there are some clear flaws and questions that need to be asked right now that nobody was really contemplating being a possibility a month ago.
Yeah. Like, and figuring it out should never involve you taking your best player off the floor. If that's the best you can come up with, you need to go back to the drawing board. If taking out your best player is the best you can come up with to remedy issues. At the end of the day, and like I'm also like I wish that like it just doesn't seem like they're ever going to share the floor this year, which is fine. Like I get why Donovan Clingan and Adama Sonogo are never going to share the floor this year, but like maybe when you're like up by 7 in the first, before the under 6 timeout. I mean, sorry, the under 12 timeout against Georgetown at home. Wait, that already happened. They weren't. Never mind. When DePaul comes to town, when you're just like already up by 18 with 2 minutes to go in 18 minutes left to go in the second half, and like you've been controlling the game, just like throw them in there for 4 minutes. Just see what happens. Maybe you'll stumble upon something that is just like maybe not great in long stretches, but like for 3.5 minutes, the defense is like, what in the world do we do with these two guys?
And then by the time they come up with an answer, they're out.
Right. It doesn't have to be for a long time because ultimately Dan Hurley is correct in thinking that that's probably not the best idea for his basketball team for long stretches. But sometimes just overwhelming size just makes you think about so many other things. Or you're not thinking about anything else just because of how big those two guys are on the floor together.
Mm-hmm.
Just a thought. But the guards do need to be better. Of course, that's right. That's my philosophy. I'm going to go look to how your guard play is first when it comes to the NCAA tournament, when it comes to me identifying the ceiling of your team, all of those things. And they're just all three of those guards, the nature of their games is that they're just sometimes going to have nights where they can't hit the broadside of a barn. And like, especially Jordan Hawkins, who you fancy as the best scorer on your basketball team, and he hasn't been great in conference play at all. Yeah, it's crazy how fast your ceiling comes down when your guards aren't playing well. And some of them played fine. I mean, Jackson, he stuffed the stat sheet 9, 6, and 4,
as he always does, right?
That's a block and a steal and 4 of 7 from the field. I mean, he was fine. I feel a little guilty roping him into this, but like the point is still the same.
Right, you need somebody to go be that, and he's not supposed to be that guy. He's supposed to do exactly what he did, right? He's your defender, your energizer, your secondary facilitator, all that stuff. He's not supposed to be the scorer,
right?
But when Newton and Hawkins are struggling that much, somebody else needs to score, and he's kind of the next guy up, and he just hasn't looked confident taking that responsibility when he's needed to.
Last thing on this game, I adore Tyler Kolek. Adore. Like 6, 8, and 5. He had 5 turnovers in this game, but like 6, 8, and 5, 3 of 6 shooting, And I get that he has the luxury of being able to play like this because of the, 3 of the 5 guys in the starting lineup are just bucket getters. Um, I wrote in a Big East roundtable for busting brackets about how few points that starting 5 had combined before the season, like had averaged last year, and now they had 3 guys averaging like 14, 15 points a game. And like part of that is because Tyler Kolek makes life so easy for that offense. And any guy who is, pushing a 1-to-1 ratio with his points and assists in college basketball is just my dude. I
Oh yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
like, against UConn it was 6 points, 8 assists. Against Georgetown it was 7 points, 15 assists. Um, St. John's, he really was a bucket getter, 14 points and 8 assists. Oh, and then by the by, sometimes he's just gonna knock down on a good night, he's just gonna go 11 of 15 from the field because Providence didn't know how to guard a pick and roll, and he'll have 29
Yeah, and
points.
he's a four. I mean, I think he's close to a 40% 3-point shooter. At least was last season, somewhere up there.
He is a 34% 3-point shooter this year.
Okay, so maybe I'm stretching a little bit. Or maybe that was last season, but he's a good shooter. That was kind of the first thing that stood out to me about him, and now he's turned into this mega facilitator. And the other thing I want to throw out there about Marquette before we move on is exactly like you said. One of the most amazing things about this is it's not like they really upgraded their roster. If anything, technically it downgraded because you lost Justin Lewis. Right? This is all internal improvement from the same group of guys who were there last season. It's not like anybody came in and changed the complexion of this team. They just all got a lot better and have figured out how to play really well together. And Cam Jones has become one of the better players in the Big East, right? And it's just good coaching, guys who now are really comfortable with each other, who know everybody's strengths and weaknesses. It's the epitome of what college basketball sort of used to be, but you don't see it anymore. And here's Marquette showing it still works. Good for them, good for Shaka, good for Tyler Kolek.
Do you know who the other 2 guys that are ahead of him in assists per game are?
Is Marquise Noel one of them?
That's correct. Marquise Noel is averaging 8.8 assists per game.
Dajuan Harris?
No. The other guy is a guy who's so Marquise Noel is second with 140 assists this year. This guy has 173 assists this year.
Yuri Collins.
That's correct. Yuri Collins is averaging 10.8 assists per game. I love that. Inject all of it into my veins.
Absolutely.
Anyways, I'm all here. If you're looking for a president of your fan club and you're a pass first point guard that actually passes first and not just in theory as a pass for first point guard, but you average 3.5 assists per game, which is like solid. That's like a solid college basketball assist number, but like also get out of here with this. Like, yeah, I take 12 shots a game, but I'm a pass first point guard with 3.5 assists. Okay. All right, homie, you can keep telling yourself that. I don't know who I'm ricochet shotting there, but there's somebody out there that I'm ricochet shotting that's looking at themselves in the mirror. It's like, maybe I'm not. Anyways, moving through the Big East, Xavier 90, Creighton 87. Just pumping out the really good basketball games here. Baylor Shireman was spectacular. Probably his best game as a Blue Jay, certainly from an efficiency perspective. 25, 5, and 4. 10 of 18 from the field, 4 of 7 from the 3-point line. And the starting lineup followed in suit. Arthur Kaluma, 5 of 9 from the field. Ryan Kalkbrenner, 5 of 8 from the field, 8 rebounds, 3 steals, and 2 blocks to his name as well, along with those 15 points. Ryan Nemhard, not quite as efficient, but 17, 7, and 5. Only turned it over 2 times, was 6 of 17 from the floor. Trey Alexander, 5 of 8, got to the free throw line a bunch. 16 points for him, and then they got basically nothing off the bench, but that's okay. They played like a combined, Francisco Farabello was the only guy to actually play real college basketball minutes, and he played 12 minutes and had 3 points. On the other end, Sully Boom, is Sully Boom the best transfer in the country?
He's certainly up there, and in terms of sort of overachieving transfer, he's got to top the list, right?
He came in and I didn't know a ton about Sully Boom. I'm sure most people didn't know a ton about Sully Boom. But he comes in as a transfer and he got off to a really good start. Like there were times that I was like, man, Sully Boom, like he's doing the thing at Xavier right now, and was just kind of curious because like there wasn't a ton of talk about Xavier, and um, I think they've won like 11 straight or something like that. So at one point, they didn't get off to a great start, at least that I'm remembering. But it was also they lost to Duke, Gonzaga, and Indiana in a 4-game stretch. So it's not like they lost to anybody poor. They haven't lost in a while. He had 26 last night, 26 and 8 to 0 turnovers. That's impressive. 9 of 18 from the field. Flanking him is Caleb Jones, who also had not Caleb, Colby Jones. 20 points, 3 assists, 4 rebounds for him. Jack Nungy had a solid game, and a slower one for Zach Fremantle, at least in the scoring department. But what say you about another good Big East game, 3-point win for the Musketeers?
Yeah. This is the problem when Creighton has the losing streak Creighton had and Ryan Kalkbrenner gets hurt, is now you've got this stretch and there's just nothing concerning about this game whatsoever. But it's a problem because of that, just the sheer win-loss record of Creighton and the fact that they need to not just be fine in conference play, they need to be good. We talked about that from the beginning, right? That you're putting yourself in a bad spot if you're just floating around 500 in conference play. Sure. And so there's no reason in the world they should expect to win this game. I'm getting to the point where I just don't think, we talked early about this idea that Indiana might just not lose at home this season. That obviously was wrong.
LOL.
Xavier might be that team, though, that you're just not beating them at the Cintas Center. With the fact that this is going so well with Sean Miller's reunion and this team is playing so well, that fan base, that environment, right, they got all the pieces. They're going to be incredibly difficult to beat in that building. So it was a good sign that Creighton scored that many points. Now, obviously, you got better defensively. But to me, the bigger takeaway here is, when the guards are that good for Xavier and they're shooting the 3-ball that well, you're not beating them, especially in that building. It's just not happening. And so, to me, this is much more interesting on the Xavier aspect of I'm still not worried about Creighton. I'm still going to buy all the Creighton stock heading into the NCAA tournament when they're going to be a not great seed if they keep this up. And the other thing, too, is, the two teams that got off to the bad start in conference play, of the teams that we expected to be near the top of the conference or sort of put themselves there as the season has gone on, Creighton and UConn, right? And then what happened? UConn and Creighton got beat on the same night by Xavier and Marquette. We're getting to the point where those two teams are running out of time in this conference title race. Because the Marquette's, Providences, and Xaviers of the world, at least one of them, just aren't going to lose enough games the rest of the way to allow you to get back in.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say. And you didn't even mention the other team that's still undefeated in conference play because they didn't play last night. At least I don't think they did. If they did, I mean, but Providence, right? Yeah. So there's another team there that it's not like if you need 3 teams, or like we're to the point where Creighton and UConn, like their chances of winning this conference are gone. Seems that way, at least, right? I mean, even if UConn wins 11 of their remaining 13 games, that's still 5 losses, which is what they're projected to do, by the way.
No, I think somebody's
sharing the Big East, just from a KenPom prediction perspective, is what's the projection. But
at 15-5, I think somebody's going to get in there with 4 or fewer losses.
I agree. That was my point. Do we really think that all 3 of those teams, maybe Marquette ends up, Marquette losing 3 more times, 4 more times with the 1 loss. But like, do we really think both Xavier and Providence are going to lose 4 more times? Like both of them, they're going to have a combined 8 losses from here on out? I certainly don't.
Maybe it's to 4, but that's the problem, right? It's right. Hard, it's really hard to see it getting to 5. Right. I think somebody's going to win it at 16-4. That would be my guess. Which, unless you pull off something incredible the rest of the season, basically eliminates Creighton and UConn. Yeah, exactly right. Like you said. Mm-hmm.
Sidetrack. Why is Xavier's SB Nation page banners on the Parkway? Do you know?
No.
Neither do I. I'm sure it has something to do with like a road that runs right past Xavier. Like, I don't understand. But like, are there lots of banners at Xavier? Like in general, do they win a lot of chips? That's a very serious question. I know coming from a Butler guy, it sounds very cynical, but um, I like most of the time I have like an idea of where that SB Nation, website name came from.
Yeah.
That one I have absolutely no clue.
I'm not going to pretend like I'm steeped in Xavier history. So,
the other thing I want to bring up, and just because it's one of those things I like to bring up. Xavier's 311th in the country in bench minutes. And in this game, a game that was played at a really high level. And I mean, and Creighton was kind of in the same boat here. So it's not like it was. Wait, no. Am I looking at the wrong page here? Scratch that. JK LOL. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong page. The other thing, Creighton is 343rd in bench minutes.
Yeah.
And like that would be helpful if they had just anybody coming off the bench and contributing at a high level.
And helps explain why it was so bad without Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Right. Because Xavier played 7 guys. Xavier is 311th in bench minutes. But Xavier's guys, the 2 of them combined, them being Jerome Hunter and Desmond Claude. Claude? It's got to be Claude, right?
I would think Claude, yeah.
Right. If it's Cloud and you spelled it Claude, I'm just upset with you. They had 17 on 7 of 12 shooting and played 44 minutes combined. Like you only need 7 players if your 2 guys off the bench are going to do that.
Jerome Hunter's been really good this season in his role. Yeah.
So, and that was kind of the difference. Xavier, you have tight rotation and a high level game, and Creighton's rotation was really tight for different reasons, right? Because it's just they just don't have a ton of guys to turn to off the bench. It seems like I'm talking about that with every single good basketball team, and maybe that's always the case, and I'm just kind of on it this year. But and it was part of the reason why I was such a big UConn guy, and still am. Because their benches, I mean, at one point their bench was averaging like 30 points a game.
Oh yeah, Klingon, Naheem Aline, yeah.
Calcaterra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, they got 8 guys I trust.
Unfortunately, 3 of those guys just sometimes can't hit the broadside of the barn. That's tough. Alrighty. 90-87, Xavier moves to 6-0 in the Big East. Providence 6-0, Marquette 6-1. Our beloved Butler Bulldogs are 2-5 in conference. It makes me sad. Shouts to the Dogs, but the Dogs are horrendous, and that makes me very sad. Listen, if your team is on a losing streak, just schedule an a la carte game with Butler, because you'll beat them by 16. Just ask St. John's. 5 straight losses, just handle them from tip to buzzer. I'm upset. Anyways, the Big East, top of the Big East is very good. Very, very good. I mean, like, and UConn and Creighton are still very, very good basketball teams in the conversation of the rest of the country. Maybe their Big East title chances, at least in the regular season, have come by the wayside, but still two good basketball teams. And those 5 teams at the top of the conference, it dips off pretty fast. I mean, and Creighton's record doesn't play the part the way that those top 4 teams do. But I don't think anybody's arguing that Creighton is way closer to the level of those 4 teams than the level of Seton Hall. Good top of the conference. They deliver with good basketball games, it seems, every single night. Big 12, Texas, 79-75. They were down 13 at halftime in this game and won the second half 50-33. I think at one point, Mike Miles. Man, speaking is really hard. This is difficult. Mike Miles, 16 points, 6 of 11, but he went like 15 minutes of game time at one point. Maybe it was longer than that. Like at one point he got a layup with like 7 minutes left or so, maybe it was a little more than that. but it said it was his first field goal since like 10:41 in the first half. So he like
And
went a stretch and he hit some really like tough jumpers coming down the stretch,
yeah,
like some tall ones, and but for chunks of this game was kept kind of at bay.
and had
Emmanuel Miller
some
was.
foul trouble in there too, which
Mhm,
there was no reason to push it because they were just fine in the first half without him on the floor. So yeah, it was
exactly.
kind of this weird. It all fell apart, and he hadn't played that much because of the foul trouble, and so there was this big stretch where he was a non-factor.
Emmanuel Miller was a factor.
Oh yeah,
21 points on 10 of 12 shooting, 4 rebounds. On the Texas side of things, look at the like we've been waiting for decades. Feels like for like and I don't actually mean like this. This is the coming of the transfers, but like this is, I mean, in this game, Dylan DeSue, 14 points on 7 of 7 from the field. Timmy Allen, 17 points on 8 of 13 from the field. Marcus Carr wasn't great in this game from a efficiency standpoint. It took him 16 shots to get up to 11 points, but hit some big shots down the stretch. Hit his only 3 of the game. Took it like if you hadn't been watching this basketball game, he took that 3 like he was 14 of 14 from the 3-point line. He was 0 of 6, which is the beauty of the confidence that Marcus Carr has. But he did have 7 assists to just 1 turnover, taking care of the basketball, distributing it. Tyrese Hunter doing just the same. The two of them had a 13-2 assist to turnover ratio, which is I've heard is pretty good. And then some bench production as well. What say you about a really high, like in this game was super fun down the stretch, just in general. There was
elite
at
shot making.
halftime, right? At halftime, it felt like this game was like, oh man, this game's kind of a dud. And it didn't turn out that way at all. There were lots of really fun things happening on the floor. It was just a high level college basketball game. What say you about a 4-point win for the Texas Longhorns, moving to 14-2 on the season, and quietly like just kind of keeping on rolling, like because of the nature of what's going on at their program right now and what has gone on at their program. I suppose the book is kind of closed on it. I mean, there will be aftermath and reports about what's going on, but Chris Beard is no longer associated with the university, so hopefully we just kind of move in the direction of, we're just talking Texas basketball again. Just kind of rolling right along, right? The Kansas State loss that we talked about, but also Kansas State scored 116 points. Like it's, he scored 103 and lost a college basketball game in regulation. Like that's an impressive feat. The point just being is that they just moved right along. They haven't had like that, oh my gosh, they lost to them. And you kind of felt like it was the trickle down effect of what's going on in their program. They continue to roll along. Good win for them over TCU. What say you?
Yeah, well, at halftime, I was really starting to wonder if Texas could defend people at home. Because, in between this game and the Kansas State game, very good defensive performance on the road. And then they showed back up at the Moody Center, and the turnovers were getting TCU out in transition, which is the last thing you want against that TCU team. And then, it just kind of snowballs. TCU is feeling confident on offense. And it looked like they were going to run him out of the building. And I was preparing to come in and talk about how many points Texas had given up in their last 2 games at home. And then they pulled it together defensively after halftime and put the clamps down and looked like one of the best defensive teams in the country again. And all of a sudden, they were able to turn this thing around, get back into the game. You mentioned Dylan DeSue. Serge Rice also just didn't miss free throws. It seemed like he came up with every important rebound in the last couple minutes and just continued to hit free throws. I think he might have missed one that really didn't matter at the very end, if I remember correctly. But they got contributions all over the place. You mentioned Timmy Allen. The guards did their thing. It's the beauty of being so multidimensional if you're Texas. And what's so appealing about this team is what you saw in this game, right? They can survive not great defensive performances because they can score 90 points. And they don't need to score 90 points to beat you because some days they look like the best defensive team in the country. They can do both and often find a way to put it together. It's been more one of the or the other during Big 12 play so far, which is partially because of the level of competition they're facing. But they do have, this incredibly high ceiling on both ends of the floor that most teams don't offer you. And that's what really intrigues me about them is it does look like they figured things out offensively. That this is way, I mean, we talked about this from the beginning. This is not last year's Texas team on offense. They are way more comfortable, way more confident, way more dynamic. And generally speaking, the defense has been there too. So you have a bad defensive half, but you fix what you need to fix. Just stop TCU's offense essentially in the second half, stop turning the ball over, and are able to come back and win. Yeah, they're really, really good. And it's unfortunate for this group of players and the coaches who are still remaining that, for obvious reasons, some of the attention has gotten taken away from what they're doing on the floor because they have been every bit as good as advertised. And I would have been coming with a very different tone had they not come back and won this game. But seeing what they did in the second half very much led me to believe it was just a bad half. It happens. This is not some trend coming off the Kansas State game where they just can't defend people anymore.
It's also TCU. I mean, you're like president of the TCU fan club this year. So, I mean, would it be belittling TCU a little bit if you came in here and was like, "What's wrong with Texas?"
Well, there's a difference between. I mean, part of it was that Texas was making TCU's life easy. I mean, I could have spun it that way. You can't give TCU those kind of opportunities.
So what? Okay, all right, I'm in. So what happens? Like, what happens when you're not supposed to mess with Texas when both teams are from Texas?
Now we're getting to the real questions.
I like that like hard hitters right now.
I feel like we need a Texan to answer that question.
Yeah. It's like a radio show. All right, call in if you're from Texas. It's my favorite. When there are a couple of shows at the station that they're like syndicated shows, and one of them specifically is the midday show on WIBC, the news talk station here in Indianapolis, and like apparently truckers just love Tony Katz Today. Like it's a 3-hour show from 12 to 3, and apparently truckers love it. And at one point when I was filling in as the producer, they were the conversation, I think it might have been during when like truckers were were protesting at the Canadian border.
Oh yeah.
I think that's when it was. But it was like and most of the time when it's like, hey, give us a call, join the conversation, like the phone lines are radio silent. But then we were talking truckers, and then, or they were talking truckers. I was not talking truckers. I was pressing the buttons. They were talking truckers, and they were like, give us a call if you're a trucker. And the phone lines lit up for the next 15 minutes. Anyways, so if all the Texas people listening to this pre-recorded podcast right now, give us a call. Tell us how you mess with Texas and not mess with Texas at the same time.
It's one of those, why do we park in a driveway kind of things? How can you mess with Texas if everybody is from Texas?
That is all I'm wanting to know on the Jays for Days podcast on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of January.
And not only are both teams from Texas, both teams have Texas in their name.
Yes. It's not like you can trick people with like some Southern Methodist University stuff. Like, no, we're talking about the Christian University in Texas and Texas. Like don't mess with Austin, Texas. You can't get more Texas than that, right? Side note before we get off of this game, the shoes that both sidelines were wearing, absolute fire. Just like these Texas branded Air Force Ones, and then just Panda Dunks on the other end. Anyways, the coordinated feet heat from the coaches and assistants, I'm all here for. Anyways, Texas 79-75 winners in the Big 12, 14-2. They're rolling right along despite what's happened off the floor in that program over the last couple months, 6 weeks or so. So good for them. Alrighty, last game that we needed to chat about here. Alabama 84, Arkansas 69. Nate Oates is doing the dang thing at Alabama, just over and over and over again. Talk about transfers. Mark Sears, 26 points, 7 of 16, went to the free throw line 10 times, made all 10 of them. He's the only one you can speak for when talking about efficient from the free throw line. They were still 69% from the line as a team, and they had a guy go 10 of 10 and another guy go 6 of 7, and somehow they were still 69% from the free throw line. Didn't seem to matter all that much. Brandon Miller had 14. Noah Clowney, 15 on 5 of 6 shooting for him. On the other side of things, it would have been really nice if Nick Smith Jr. could play in this basketball game. 3 guys did most of the scoring, but it wasn't exactly efficient. Devontae Davis, 16, took him 17 shots to get there. Petition to call Ricky Council the 4th RC4 on this podcast.
Oh, I like it.
Thank you. RC4, 15 on 4 of 10 shooting. Mekhi Mitchell did have 10 on 3 of 5 shooting, but ultimately the Razorbacks just 2 of 10 from the 3-point line. They were even worse from the free throw line. Worse than Alabama, not worse than their 2 of 10 from the 3-point line, just to be clear. They were 15 of 23, shot just 42% from the field, lose by 15 to, at this point, an Alabama team that is just better than they are, but still losing by 15 at home is something that I didn't think we were going to say very many times in the Arkansas season. And maybe even slightly more concerning is that when I saw the outcome of this game, I'm not totally sure I was all that surprised, which is even the more surprising thing to say. What say you?
To give credit to Arkansas, I mean, it looked like it was going to get out of hand. They climbed back in and then were eventually buried under another flurry of threes from Alabama. They re-extended the lead and kind of put the game out of reach. But they did get themselves back into it where it was closer than that final score suggests, I would argue. But at the same time, they had one good stretch and were thoroughly outplayed the rest of the game. Yeah, Mark Sears was great. When Alabama's hitting threes like that, good luck trying to beat them. I don't care where you're playing. The Arkansas positive out of this for me is you did see some contributions in the front court in terms of trying to fill this void left by Nick Smith and Trevin Brazile. The Mitchells, Jalen Graham. There was something there. Eric Musselman's kind of trying to figure out how to reorganize this thing. It's not enough, and it's certainly not enough when Anthony Black gets in foul trouble. You got him on the bench and Nick Smith unavailable and Trevin Brazile out for the season. I mean, there's a lot that has to happen for Arkansas to beat the best teams in the SEC right now. It's just the reality of the situation with the roster that's there, and Anthony Black needs to be probably the best player on the floor. That's part of that formula, and you get him in foul trouble. It doesn't matter whether he's playing well or not. If he's on the bench, you're kind of done for when Alabama is playing this well. So some positives to take away. They did put up a good fight, got back into the game at one point. You saw multiple players contributing in the front court, but yeah, they're just not on Alabama's level right now.
Let's see, how deep can we go before this starts to kind of get out of hand? With 13 minutes left on the clock, this game was 49-48. 33-33 at halftime. And then you get to 9 minutes left, and it's 62-50. And then they get back into it. At one point, the score is, 65-61 with 6:51 left. 65-63 with 4 minutes left. How did they lose this basketball game by 15, right? When it was 65-63 with 4:45. Alabama took a timeout with 4:45 left, and it was a 2-point game. And then they lost by 15.
Flurry of threes?
Flurry of threes. The ultimate equalizer, or the unequalizer in this case, but the equalizer nonetheless. How much faith you got in Alabama at this point?
Certainly more than years past.
Why? I think I agree with you. I'm just curious.
All right. They do seem to be better shooting the ball. That helps. Especially after last season where they were just bad shooting the ball and didn't care. this team can actually hit threes. Bringing in Mark Sears helps with that. Obviously, Brandon Miller helps with that. And also just the existence of Brandon Miller.
That's a game changer level player.
Yeah. They've never had a guy like that. I mean, they've had some awful, all SEC caliber players, some awfully good players.
And they've always been guards. I think that's important too.
Yes. Right. He's different.
Yeah.
I say that phrase a lot, but so that is, and they've got some versatility defensively. They're not overly reliant on one player. He doesn't have to be great for them to win. See this game, Mark Sears can carry the load offensively. I still have questions about whether this formula can win you a national championship and whether it's completely sustainable game to game, because there's going to be some times where you're going to have, they're going to have some bad losses. But those losses this season are more than canceled out by the amount of wins they're picking up, obviously, and their ability to play with the best teams in the country consistently, right? That they're going to have a couple stinkers because they're so reliant on the three, but they don't need to have everything go right. They don't need to be great to beat a really good Arkansas team here, and obviously an Arkansas team that's shorthanded, but they were just a better basketball team. That's what's making me confident is I don't think they're as reliant on the three from a game-to-game standpoint, that I trust them more. I feel like they're, especially last season, it's just, I don't know what happens when they take the floor. Could they win? Sure, they could beat anybody in the country if they hit their threes. They could also lose to anybody. I feel like they have raised their
and they
floor.
did both of those things.
Yes, they did both of those things a lot last season.
Yes,
I think they have raised their floor significantly. I guess that's how I answer the question. I don't worry as much about everything going wrong. You just accept they're going to take a couple losses they probably shouldn't because of the threes. But they're very much living in the good to great performance category, which was not the case last season.
It's January 12th, and they've lost one game where their offense really failed them. Right. I mean, that UConn game, they lost 82-67. It wasn't pretty. I also think that was a different Alabama team, just fundamentally. They're just better than they were at that point. But they lost to Gonzaga by 10, but they scored 90, right? Gonzaga just had it that day. And still, even with this Gonzaga team, when Gonzaga has it, you're not going to beat them. It just doesn't matter how good you play, i.e. you scored 90 points in a men's college basketball game in regulation, right? You're going to win that game 95% of the time, except for when Gonzaga has it going. Your feelings about their 3-point shooting are correct. They're 205 spots better in 3-point shooting right now than they were at the end of last season.
There you go.
They finished 303rd in the country in 3-point shooting last year, a 19-14 year. I don't remember that year being that bad. In my head, if you asked me to guess what their record was, I would have been way closer to 23-10 than 19-14.
Yeah.
They did lose their only SEC game and then lost their tournament game.
Okay.
So they finished the season 19-12, which is a little closer, but then had two stinker losses to end the season. They lost to Vanderbilt in the SEC tournament and then lost to Notre Dame in the first round of the tournament as a 6th seed, by the way. 3-point shooting, they're 98th in the country this year, 35%. And when they do all the things that they do, 98th in the country is more than functional. Yeah. That's above average by definition. Last year, they were 303rd, shooting 30.9% as a team. This year, it's 98th, shooting 35.4%.
Yep. That's the difference between fine Alabama and really good Alabama.
100%.
Mostly, right. It'll probably cost them a game or two because they're still not a great 3-point shooting team, but this is much more similar to the teams Nate Oates has had in the past where you're really scared of them and they're one of the best teams in the country. Obviously, that's what they've been doing so far this season. They fixed the biggest issue from last season. So they're right back to being where you expect this Alabama program to be at this point. And Brandon Miller then is the cherry on top that makes you a top 5 team in the country.
For sure. The last thing I'll say, and this doesn't have a ton to do with this game specifically. I'm just fascinated by Javon Quinterly's college basketball career, just in general. Right, you start at Villanova, and things don't go the way. I saw a TikTok. Can we talk about this for a second? I saw a TikTok the other day. It was like, "Where is Javon Quinterly now?" It's like Javon Quinterly's a backup guard on one of the best teams in the country. Like, what are we doing here? Find better content. But he was just like the guy in the TikTok was like he was one of the best guards in the country coming out of high school, and then at Villanova, the coach at Villanova didn't say Jay Wright. He just said, and then the coach at Villanova just didn't play him in his year at Villanova. I was like if you're gonna do this, at least like Quinterly was bad.
Yeah,
as a freshman at Villanova.
I'm gonna go to bat for.
That's why he didn't play. He was bad.
I'm going to go to bat for Jay Wright on that one and say I saw Jay Wright at least trying a little bit to make that work.
Yeah, he was bad. That's why he didn't play. Anyways, but the point being is that he started his career at Villanova, 25 games he played in that year, 9 minutes a game, 3.2 points, 33% shooting. Then he goes to Alabama and plays in 30 games, starts 7 of them, finishes the year with 13 points, 3 assists, pretty good year, shoots 43% from the 3-point line, like good year. Last year, starts 27 of the 33 games that Alabama plays, 14 points a game, 4.2 assists, 3 rebounds, had a really bad 3-point shooting year, just 28%. And now he's just a reserve again. And, he played 11 minutes in this last game. He averages 17 minutes per game, 7 points, 3.4 assists. Just like if you told me, and it seems to, from what I've seen and the people who cover this program, that he seems to have just kind of situated himself into this role. And while I'm sure he would love to be the starting point guard, any bench guy who says, I just like being on the bench, you're a liar. But the point being is that after the way, the rocky start he got off to, and then how important he was really quickly at Alabama, for him to kind of weave his way back into just a really solid contributor off the bench, which there aren't a ton of those in college basketball this year. Just a really solid contributor on a really good team.
And especially guys you feel confident about running your offense.
Right. 100%. I mean, you could have your 2 starting guards in foul trouble. Oh, Quinterly has to run the offense for 15 minutes in the second half. Perfect. Let's do it.
Right.
So him coming into college, the fact that he's still here 4 years later is surprising in and of itself. But it's been a winding road. I'm sure it hasn't been easy, but he's on a team that has a chance to go really deep in March, and for him to kind of situate himself into a spot that if you asked me 4 years ago if he was capable of that, just as a, from a maturity standpoint and from a willingness to do that standpoint, I would have been surprised by that. But alas, here he is being an important part of this basketball team that is just a veteran bench guy that gives them 17 good minutes per game.
And don't forget about the torn ACL too.
Right. And the torn ACL.
Right. Yes. I mean, he kind of just got the unfortunate situation where he wasn't ready to go at the beginning of the season. And by the time he was working his way back and getting closer to 100%, which he's probably still not even at 100%, but obviously, he's much closer to being at whatever full strength is going to be at this point for him. It was kind of too late. You're just not getting, you're not getting that spot back. It's working too well. And so he kind of just had to slot into this role he's found now, where he's still an important member of this team and still playing well. Yeah, just about everything from the transfers, the injury, right when he was kind of at the peak of his college career, if you will, from a personal standpoint. And yeah, here he is, and he could very well end up with something to show out of this from a hardware perspective, the way they're going.
Yeah. And I feel like that was part of what was going on at Villanova, that he just kind of checked out by the time that season was over. So that's just, to be locked in a different way is just cool. Anyways, anything else in this game?
No, nothing else from this game. I got one question I want to throw at you.
Hit me. I'm out of stuff, so hit me.
Since we talked about these two teams, You know which team has beaten both Xavier and Alabama this season? And it's funny because you specifically mentioned both of these games in this podcast.
Did I really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Well, Alabama's only lost to Gonzaga and UConn, but UConn didn't beat Xavier, so it has to be Gonzaga.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that! Look at that
Right?
reasoning there.
I believe that game was in Tuscaloosa, right? The 100-90.
It was semi-home, so I think it was like in Birmingham. Yeah,
Oh,
it was
that's
in
right. Yeah,
Birmingham.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was
Yeah.
in Birmingham.
I was thinking
it was
road.
it was at Legacy Arena in Birmingham.
Yes. So road for Gonzaga's purposes. Yeah. So just very quietly, now that they've hidden themselves away in the WCC, those
Listen,
we're gonna look up by the end of this thing. They're gonna have a really good record. Drew Timmy's gonna have a lot of numbers, and all of a sudden, their resume's gonna look pretty good because of those two games. Even though they've lost a lot of the other ones they played in non-conference.
If it weren't for the Baylor loss, it'd be like, I mean, they lost to Baylor, and Baylor's just not great.
Mm-hmm.
Like the further we get removed from that game, the worse that loss gets.
Yeah.
Especially in 64-63, like what in the world are we doing in one of the Dakotas kind of basketball game? Like what building is this? Like it's just a weird night. Oh, by the way, it's on it was it Prime?
Peacock.
No, it was Peacock. It was the Cock. Hell yeah. Ugh, that was such a weird that is the weirdest college basketball game of the year. 1000%.
Oh, it's not close.
Among all the other things that like they just kind of stumbled and struggled to a 64-63 final score. I apologize for the ricochet shots at the Dakotas, but come on. Why is that game not being...
I've been to South Dakota.
I'm sure they are, but like play your basketball games in Chicago. Okay? like let's just come on. But apart from that, I mean the other two losses are Texas and Purdue. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, and they were ugly. Both of them were. The Texas game, they got run out of the building almost immediately. And the Purdue game, they just ran into the buzzsaw at the PK85 that was Purdue. But other than that, I mean, they haven't lost since December 2nd. The Baylor game was their last loss. They have that Alabama win. One of their tougher games of the season is actually tonight against BYU on the road. They're actually, they'll play St. Mary's on the road. They're actually predicted to lose that game. St. Mary's 9th at KenPom. Can we talk about that for a second? But yeah, watch. This will be the year. Everybody will have hopped off the wagon, and they'll win it this year. And I'll be kicking myself because I hopped off the wagon.
They will reemerge out of WCC play with the guard issues fixed.
Yeah, and like. Some of the guard issues have really worked themselves out. Like Nolan Hickman had 20 points on 8 of 9 shooting in their most recent win over Santa Clara.
See, there you go.
Now, granted, I'm a little concerned that they needed all of that to beat Santa Clara on the road, and they also needed everything to beat San Francisco on the road the game prior. So clearly not as bulletproof of a Gonzaga team as we've been used to the last few years, but still, it'll be the year. They'll just turn around. It's like, oh my gosh, Nolan Hickman, All-American level, right. Oh, right. Drew Timme, preseason National Player of the Year.
Here comes Julian Strother.
Right. Julian Strother. There he is. Right. Malachi Smith averaging 13 off the bench. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my Lord, I don't want to play Gonzaga in the Elite Eight. That'll be how it goes. Anyways, I'm out of stuff. You got anything else?
No.
I suppose the last thing we can do real quick is the basketball games on the schedule that could pique your interest in the next 4 days or so. Tonight you get Gonzaga at BYU. That's an intriguing one. It's the only top 25 matchup with a line that's less than, a spread that's less than 12. So that's basically all we're looking at on Thursday. Purdue playing a Big Ten Friday night basketball game at home against Nebraska. A Nebraska team that's not great, but they did struggle with them in Lincoln. So there's that. Saturday, of course, delivering per usual. Kentucky at Tennessee, which is unfortunately just not that exciting at this point. Number 18, Wisconsin goes to Indiana, an Indiana team that just with all their injuries their season is on the verge of derailing. They've lost 3 straight to Iowa, Northwestern, and Penn State. They got smoked by Penn State on Wednesday night, like 85-66. I think the final score of that one was 2:00. Sacrilegiously on ESPN2. Kansas State is at TCU. That one is fantastic. What game is on ESPN at 2? What's on ESPN at 2:00 on a Saturday?
What time is the Iowa State Kansas game? That's this weekend too, right? Is that one later?
That's on ESPN Plus. It's the Big 12 thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So what's on ESPN at 2:00? There's no game on ESPN at 2:00.
Is it?
Unless it's a game that's between 2 unranked teams, but I find that hard to believe.
Is it NFL playoff coverage?
No, I don't think so.
I'm not going to pretend like I've memorized which game is when.
Because I'm pretty sure isn't the only ESPN game of the weekend
the Monday night one?
The Monday night one?
I think you're right.
Hold on, I'm scrolling quickly through the non-top 25 matchups. Oh, trivia time. Who's playing on ESPN at 2:00?
Is that supposed to give me a hint?
Your hint is that one of these teams was never supposed to be a non-top 25 team this year. The other one's the worst Power 5 conference team in the country.
The worst Power 5?
One of them.
And the other team wasn't supposed to be a top 20? Oh, was supposed to be a top 25 team.
Yes. The other team broke records for how fast they exited the top 25.
Oh, that's right. I did see this game. Yeah, it was a tough. I was thinking when they were reading the advertisements for these. I think it was both ACC.
Oh, yes,
games.
I saw that. Yes.
Tough sell for North Carolina,
Tennessee,
Louisville.
Right, and it was Tennessee. Kentucky
okay, that was the other one.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, man, that is not the way they thought that slate was going to go. Yes, okay, so there is a college basketball game there. It's just not a great one. Providence and Creighton at 2:00. The 2:00 slot hitting hard. Kansas State, TCU, Providence, Creighton in that slot there at the CHI Health Center, Omaha. Make sure you say all of it. The CHI Health Center, Omaha. I'm going to fall asleep. Iowa State and Kansas at 4:00 at Fog Allen. Then kind of tails off at the back end of the night. You got Texas Tech and Texas, but it's at the Moody Center, so that loses some of its intrigue just because it's at the Moody Center. And then on Big Fox at noon on Sunday, Marquette is at Xavier. So that's a good one as well. Good college basketball weekend as per usual. And we'll be there to talk about it. The last thing I want to say is just shouts to Charleston to keep on rolling. Really good mid-major college basketball game last night between them and UNC Wilmington.
Close one.
Close one. They were up by 11 at halftime, and Wilmington clawed back into it, and Charleston now 17-1, and I believe the owner of the longest win streak in the country. Hold on, Kim Pom will tell me. Yes, the nation's longest active win streak at 16 games. So they keep on rolling. Pat Kelsey, whenever you need a brick wall to be run through, let me know. I'm there. Their only loss this year, actually, one that at this point, if they played again, they might be the favorite in. If they played a neutral site game against North Carolina tomorrow, would they be favored? I feel like they'd have to be.
It'd be real close one way or the other.
Right?
I mean, North Carolina haven't been that bad in ACC play.
No.
So maybe it'd be one or two, but you're absolutely right. It would be close to a pick 'em. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How about that? They would probably be favored. Charleston is still 79th at KenPom. And ultimately their wins, apart from the run they went on in the event they played in Charleston, that they won for the first time. Other than that, they haven't played very many teams, but they're 17-1. They got a really good test last night against UNC Wilmington. So shouts to the mid-major action going on at a high level. All right, I'm out of stuff. Ready to get out of here?
Yep.
Let's do it. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. Some nice support on the TikToks. We appreciate that. As a podcast I listen to, he says when he's plugging the TikTok, he says, "We'll see you on the TikToks." I like that. So thank you for coming to the TikToks. Very much appreciated. YouTube bite-sized content, kind of chunks taken out of the podcast and subject-based little clips on the YouTube channel, as well as the full podcast in video form, and then TikTok, the fun-sized content happening over there. That's all we got for you. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.